You're not bad with money, because if you've ever ended a month wondering where your paycheck went, after working full hours, skipping restaurants, doing everything right, the instinct is to blame yourself, to think everyone else has figured out a trick that you haven't. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the math itself is broken? Today, we're looking at the real cost of living, not the official numbers governments publish, the real one. The one that shows up when you're staring at your bank account deciding which bill can wait one more week. Stay until the end, because once you see how the system works, you'll stop blaming yourself and start asking the right questions. Here's a number that should bother you more than it does. Since 1979, adjusted for inflation, the average American wage has grown by roughly 15%. In that same period, housing costs went up over 200%. Healthcare over 500%, college tuition over 1,000%. Wages moved 15%. Everything you need to live moved between 200 and 1,000%. This is the affordability gap, and it's the reason that doing everything your parents told you, work hard, save consistently, be responsible, still leaves millions of people short every month. It's not a personal failure. It's a structural one. For most of the 20th century, the deal was simple. You trade your time for money, and that money covers the basics with something left over. A home, a car, food, maybe a vacation once a year. That deal is gone. And once you understand that, everything else will make sense. Why young people feel exhausted instead of optimistic. Why two-income households still struggle. Why saving feels pointless when expenses grow faster than income. The foundation shifted. The promises didn't update with it. The median home price today sits around $415,000. The median household income around $75,000, a ratio of over 5 to 1. A generation ago, it was 3 to 1. That difference is what separates difficult from nearly impossible for first-time buyers. And renting isn't the escape it used to be. The average one-bedroom now costs $1,500 a month nationally. In major cities, that doubles, which means where the jobs are, most of the paychecks disappear too. How did we get here? 3 things at once. America stopped building enough homes after 2008 and never recovered. Institutional investors entered the housing market at scale, buying starter homes and converting them to rentals. And mortgage rates jumped above 6%, freezing existing owners in place and blocking new buyers from entering. Less supply, more competition, higher prices, and nobody with real power has much incentive to change it. The average first-time home buyer is now in their mid-30s. A milestone that used to mark the beginning of building wealth now feels like a finish line that keeps moving. Once you've solved housing, or except you can't, the next wave hits. Utilities. In states with extreme summers or winters, electric bills hit $500, $600 during peak months. Not because people are careless, because the climate and aging infrastructure didn't give them a choice. Transportation. Most Americans don't live near functional public transit, so owning a car isn't a lifestyle choice, it's a job requirement. Average monthly payment on a new vehicle exceeds $700. Add insurance, gas, and maintenance, and you're looking at over $1,000 a month just to access your income. $1,000 just to get to work. Then healthcare. Even with insurance, the average family spends thousands per year in out-of-pocket costs. A single emergency room visit can erase months of savings, and unlike housing, you can't delay a health crisis. These aren't luxuries. Together, they form what many families call a second rent, a second full payment due every month before a single dollar goes towards anything resembling quality of life. There's a specific kind of stress that only comes from standing in a grocery aisle doing math in your head. Food prices never really came down after the pandemic. Inflation eased, but from a higher baseline, which means every week the same grocery run costs more than 2 years ago, and nobody adjusts your paycheck to match. A single adult following a moderate food plan spends $300 to $400 a month on groceries. A family of 4, over $1,000 just for food cooked at home. And that assumes access to a real supermarket, which millions of Americans in food deserts simply don't have. When the nearest grocery store doesn't exist or only stocks processed food, families don't choose to eat unhealthy. They adapt to the only options available. Options that tend to cost more per calorie and hit harder on long-term health, which circles back to healthcare costs. It's a loop, and it tightens every year. When income doesn't cover expenses, something fills the gap. For tens of millions of Americans, that something is a credit card. Total U.S. credit card debt recently crossed $1.2 trillion, a record. The average interest rate sits above 22%, and nearly half of cardholders report using credit not for discretionary spending, but for essentials, groceries, utility bills, medical costs. That's not overspending, that's a structural shortfall papered over by high-interest debt. And here's the trap. A $5,000 balance at 22% interest paid on minimums doesn't just cost you $5,000, it costs you years. The real price of that grocery run triples by the time the debt clears. This is where the cost of living becomes a cost of debt, where falling behind becomes a cycle that's genuinely hard to escape without a sudden jump in income, which for most people never comes. Here's what nobody puts in the economic data: the exhaustion. The constant low-level calculation running in the background of every decision. Can I afford this? What if something breaks? What if I get sick? Financial stress is the most commonly reported source of anxiety among American adults. It changes how people sleep, how they parent, how they perform at work. It shapes whether people have children, whether they leave a bad job, whether they ever take a risk on something better. When people say they feel stuck, they don't mean lazy. They mean the math of moving forward requires a cushion they can't build when every month is a zero-sum equation. This is the real cost of living, not the number of your bills, the life that gets smaller every year the gap between wages and essentials keeps widening. Understanding this won't lower your rent, but it moves the question from "what am I doing wrong?" to "what is the system doing wrong?" And that's not a small shift. Millions of people are navigating the same broken math. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns have causes. And causes, eventually, have responses. If this gave you a clearer picture of what you're actually up against, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because next week we're going to look at what some countries are doing differently, and whether any of it could work here.